Hey everyone, welcome to another AI conversation. I'm very happy to be joined today by Miss Sharon-Drew Morgen, who I actually met on LinkedIn. I'm sure one of those interesting threads. Hi Sharon-Drew, welcome to the show.
Hi, Dominic.
Yeah,
Thank
so
you.
Sharon-Drew, we've been having on and off conversations on email, on LinkedIn, and just now she's an original thinker. And if you're wondering what that means, I'll let Sharon-Drew explain it better. So maybe Sharon-Drew, for the benefit of the maybe the 1 to 2 people who have never heard of you, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Um, hi everybody. I have never figured out how to be normal. It's just not something that I knew how to do. I was diagnosed with Asperger's when I was 61 years old. And until that time, I just thought I was strange, which I probably am anyway. I never could figure out how to do the things everybody wanted me to do and say the things. I didn't understand how to be normal. NT, I guess, neurotypical. So I tried to do it right and I could never get it right. And I was always in trouble. I was always getting thrown out of school and I was always getting beaten by my parents because I could never do it. So I finally realized that the problem was in my brain, not in what I was trying to do. So I began going to libraries, and I have to tell you, in those days, there were no sections on brains and minds and neural chemistry or neural circuits or nothing like that. So I began thinking and putting together things that I could see in my brain, that I could hear. And I began putting together models of change. So the first thing I figured out was that there are specific steps to change. And I put together the 13 steps of change, which still nobody else has ever figured out, which to me is pretty simple. And then I began figuring out how to get into the brain, because if I wanted to change, there had to be a difference between what I'm doing now and what I wanted to do, and how do I get to my brain to figure it out. So it took me 10 years to invent what I call a facilitative question, which is worded in a specific sequence using specific terms that get specifically to your brain and to specific circuits in your brain, so that you can come up with your own best answer. Because I've always trusted, and I wanted people to trust that I had my own answers. So why wouldn't I trust that other people have their own answers? But that really isn't the way it works. Salespeople think they have the answers, trainers think they have the answers, leaders think they have the answers, doctors think they have the answers. So information gets pushed to the other, and then the influencer can't imagine why this person is resisting. And they're using their words, their intent, their sequence, their personality, and assuming that the other person's brain is going to go, oh, I understand that. I know how to do that. And it's not true. So one of the things that I developed, and I've written 10 books on this stuff, one of which is a New York Times business bestseller, which I'm sort of proud of. That was Selling with Integrity. Everyone seems to have read that. One of the things that I've done is I have invented a new change facilitation model that I put into leadership and change, but I also put into the sales field, because this sales field seems to believe that the product and the product placement is the only job, the only thing that needs to happen for buyers. But they don't understand that any purchase is a risk management job, because if the solution will cost more of a risk than staying the same, they won't buy anything new because the risk is too big. And the sales model is in the wrong place, for example. I mean, we can discuss that later. So I've invented a buying facilitation model. I invented a way to train that gets to people's brains instead of pushing information. And so that's what I do. And it's, I don't even know there's a box. People tell me I'm outside the box, but I don't even think of a box. I can just think there's a problem and I figure it out somehow. And sometimes it takes me 10 years, but I figure it out.
This is all very interesting, Sharon-Drew, and I think it resonates a lot with what we do. So I run an organization called Data Ethics, and you mentioned about how information is nowadays naturally pushed to people. So the fact that we all especially exist in a digital, basically digital society, it's in a way rewritten a lot of the rules of communication. We tend to think of everything as a device, even other people, because we kind of see them through a device. And that for us is just a symptom of how technology has changed us. And I'm not necessarily sure for the better. And, it's interesting to hear about your work. So you mentioned that you're working on an API. So would you like to share more about
An
that API?
API with an SDK
Mhm.
that works with an LLM and applications. So I'm trying to get all the words right here. I've got it
Get all of
here.
the search engine stuff in.
Yeah, no, what I have, no, it's not that at all. What I'm going to be teaching AI to do is formulate specific questions that are self-generated by the user that will lead the user to the specific circuits in their brain where their values-based criteria are stored for decision making. So right now, if I needed to put my mother into an old age home, I wouldn't ask generative or causal AI if I should do that. There wouldn't be a proper answer for that. But if I need to make a personal decision, there's no place to do that right now online. But I'm creating facilitation AI that will create self-prompt, self-generated questions. So instead of an answer, it's going to have questions. And these questions will be in a specific sequence to get to specific parts of my brain where I can find my own answer. Again, I trust everyone has their own answer. And then ultimately will be led to causal or generative AI. So if I decide that, if we decide, the computer and I decide that now would be the time for my mother to go, then it might lead me to nursing homes near my house. So then it switches over to the more conventional use of AI and chat.
Yeah, I mean, this brings to mind something. I don't know who it was, Elon Musk or some of these AI godfathers, who mentioned that we started with kind of that limbic brain, that reptilian brain, which is really where the emotion centers are and the decision centers as well. Then later we evolved that neocortex, which is all of the other stuff, analysis, logic, perception, but doesn't make decisions. Decisions still goes back to the emotional centers. And then we've now virtually created another layer, which is the internet, which is just access to all of that static information.
But you know something, Dominic, and right now, and I think this is bad, and this is where the ethical problem comes in. Right now, it's all based on information.
Yes.
And frankly, it's all biased. Excuse me. It's biased by the prompt engineer's questions. It's biased by the rules that are programmed in. So what you're getting, you're asking a biased question, and it's being ruled by a biased question, and you're getting a biased answer. So for me, it's missing some ethics. Just saying, for me.
Yeah, and yeah, more to the point that you're saying. So now you have a third layer with all of that information, and you talk about bias. It actually makes, I don't know how it is better or worse, when you have a fourth layer, which is artificial intelligence, which is like data in motion. It's not just an answer you get from a question. This is a formulated, generated, basically new piece of information that suggests things to you or makes converses with you. And well, the first thing I want to highlight is we're not used to information coming back to us automatically in a form that sounds like it talks to us, but there's no one else talking. It's you talking to yourself through this AI. And that could lead people to weird places. Like I just want to highlight the weirdest stories. One was a man who was obviously depressed, chatting with a chatbot. And again, trigger warning. He decided to end his life because he was so convinced by the chatbot that he was the source of his problems. Could be factually true, but discouraged beyond all hope. Another woman wanted to marry an AI because she came from another depressed situation, had a bad breakup, opened an account at Replica, which is an AI service, and was so impressed so enamored with the chatbot, which is just basically a digital mirror, reflects what you tell it, fell in love with the chatbot. So
But it's
I'm
very problematic. I invented this model for sales called buying facilitation.
yeah.
And it has a registered trademark. It has a legal definition. And a friend of mine sent me 5 pages. She said, "What is buying facilitation?" She asked ChatGPT, and it came back, "Buying facilitation, registered trademark, invented by Sharon-Drew Morgen." Great. And then it went on to an entire sales.
Pitch.
No, the sales orientation description, which my stuff is a change facilitation brain model that has nothing to do with sales at all.
Mhm.
And the precursor to sales is the change management, risk management portion. Sales comes after. But what it did was it took all of the worst parts of manipulation that the old sales models do. And it said buying facilitation is this manipulative consulting model that sales uses to manipulate and influence. And it's like it had nothing to do with what I invented. So people that don't know me or haven't read any of my books or haven't studied with me will say, "Oh, that sounds terrible," and believe that that's accurate when it's not accurate at all. I was heartsick.
Yep. I have a friend and a mentor. He's a well distinguished academic. Uh and he suffered massive humiliation when he was attending an event with 3,000 plus people. And the organizers asked ChatGPT, because he had obviously a long CV, occupational hazard. And then the organizers just decided to ask ChatGPT, can you give us a short description of Professor so and so, without even including the CV in the prompt. So ChatGPT just invented a totally bogus, optically likely but incorrect profile. And 3,000 people now think, oh, he, went to Oxford, graduated, Wharton, is part of the World Bank, all of these really fantastic stuff, which, maybe, as I said, optically likely looks like someone's profile, but obviously not. And I think that's just part of that problem. The ethical issue here is it's not just us prompting the data, it's the data prompting itself. It builds itself, and
So
either we don't have the rules for it, or we're not ready for that.
that's one of the reasons that I'm developing facilitation AI, because it's not based on information.
Mhm.
It's based on criteria. It's not based on generating or extracting or creating information using it's a finite information pool. It's very large, but it's still a finite information pool. So my stuff is going to have a smaller data set
Mhm.
because I'm only asking the AI to create specific types of questions. It's a facilitative question that is directing the person to their own brain. So for example, if I said I'm a college senior and I can't decide whether I should go to the local school and stay home and save money and live near my girlfriend, or I should go across country to the program that I want to study as my profession, which should I do?
Mhm.
It wouldn't come back with any information. It would come back with a question. So it might say something like, has there ever been a time that you've been able to make a decision with X? So I teach it, oh, no, I never have. So then it takes you down a different track. So again, the answer is a question that helps you think of the next answer for yourself. So you come up with the answer and my facilitation AI comes up with the question. So that means it's ethical because there's no bias in it at all.
Or it doesn't force a line of reasoning that you wouldn't otherwise want to go through. And I think that's always been the problem with the internet. Like, you go to a platform like Twitter, hoping to get kind of a democratized feed, not realizing that because of the AI, you're getting a curated feed, but not in the way that you would like to curate. That's a problem. Um, I don't know if you remember the good old choose your own adventure books. I was a big fan of those when I was a kid.
I do, I remember those.
Yeah, and what you're saying is kind of like the AI version of that, where you give the agency back to the person. The AI
Yes,
facilitates it. That's a really cool way of changing it. I was actually planning. So I have a very nascent YouTube channel, and our interview is going to be viewed on that soon enough. But uh, I want to also talk about AI in a way that people kind of opening the hood. How do these things work? And anyway, the point I want to make is one of the secret mechanisms of why these large language models seem to work so well is that it doesn't retrieve data in a kind of in a traditional search engine way where you just match text, etc. It really looks at context. That's why prompting with context always works better than just blindly asking a question. And what you're trying to do, if correct me if I'm wrong, is take it to the next level where it's not just reacting to what you prompted it actually prompts you back. Okay,
oh
hey.
yeah.
And that's, I think, really amazing. I mean, I think you could be unlocking a totally new area of
It's not
usage.
only that, it's in a very specific sequence. So I have figured out what has to happen to find the correct neural circuits
Hmm.
where information is stored. So we use specific words in a specific sequence, so forth.
Yeah.
And the goal is to help the person, the user, reach their criteria-based neural circuit.
Mm.
Okay. So, and the AI won't have any way of knowing what that would be until the person comes up with their next question. And of course, it'll be rules-based. So I know the rules. And I have to just teach the programmer how to program them in, for God's sakes. I don't know how that's going to work. That's going to be interesting.
Yeah, who
So,
knows? AI could help program it for you on the side. I mean, that's always for me one of the biggest bottlenecks in traditional software development is there just aren't enough coders to go around, really. And the fact that these models, or at least some of these models, can write code to a certain extent competently enough can be a massive productivity improvement, as you're not bottlenecked to one or two developers. But anyway, that's a different topic slightly. So going back, so um can you share a little bit about your journey as an author? So, how did you get started? What was one of you talked about this book with integrity, which was the New York Times bestseller thing. You said 3 years of pain offline earlier.
the 3 Years of Pain was the book I just wrote. I
Okay,
just wrote a book called How. I mean, I decided at my advancing age that it was time to put all my work
right.
um, so that when I die or not around to train anymore, which thankfully I am now, but I don't know, never,
Yeah.
um, that it'll all be in one place for people to learn. And I had to unwrap my own brain to get that on paper. And
Hmm.
it was nasty. It was nasty. I'd wake up in the morning and go, do I have to get up? Do I have to get up? Yes, I have to get up. But the book before that, I was at a meditation retreat and I heard one of the yogis talking with the meditation teacher, and they were both educated people and they absolutely did not have any way of understanding each other or communicating. We were all sitting there going, what is going on here? It was like two different languages. So I got home and I called my agent and I said, I want to write a book on the distance between what somebody says and what somebody hears. So she got me a contract with Amacom, which is no longer around.
Hmm.
And
Is it
I
did it disappear already? I still see
I
Amacom books. Okay.
Amacom, that I heard, I don't know.
Yeah, yeah.
I had to leave them because when I got the contract and I put the money in the bank, I then had to write the book. And I began searching for the gap between what somebody says and what somebody hears. And I got nothing. I got nothing. And I was doing every kind of search for hours and hours and hours and hours. And there wasn't a word, a sentence, a paragraph, an essay, an article, a book, nothing. There was nothing. So I went, okay, I'll figure it out. So I spent 3 years figuring it out. And I got pieces, and books on active listening only talk about the words that you hear, which are mistranslated by the brain if they're not matching the intent of the speaker. We don't realize that everything we hear, see, feel, think, do, notice, understand, everything comes from circuitry in our brain that translates signals into meaning for us.
Mm-hmm.
And if the signals aren't there, we don't notice it, we don't hear it, we don't see it. And sometimes the brain does this thing, it sends it to a close enough, similar enough circuit. So we mistranslate it, we misunderstand it, we misforget it because it went to the wrong circuit.
Yeah.
And I didn't understand that at the time either. So I had to try to figure, and then they would say things like, sound vibrations enter and get turned into signals. Well, for me, there's a 1 mile gap between the two parts of that sentence. Well, how does it know to get that signal or this signal?
Yep.
How does the brain know what signals to delete or leave out or add, or how does the brain know how to do that? So I was filling in pieces where there were times when there were no explanations of anything. And so, for example, I figured out that belief filters belong there. And that was in 2000, maybe 2010. And then in 2017, researchers discovered that dopamine goes there, which is where your beliefs are. So I had figured it out earlier just from thinking about it, but they did find out that I was right. So I spent 3 years squinching my brain. I'd fall asleep at the computer and I'd wake up and fall asleep 6 hours later, and people were bringing me food. I didn't remember going to sleep, eating, changing my clothes for 3 years. I don't remember. I must have. I don't remember any of it because I was in the middle of that book. And then it's really kind of a cool book. And then when I handed it into Amicom, she called me and said, "What the hell is this? I thought you were sending me a book on active listening." I went, "No, I never meant to do that." So she said, "Fix it." And I said, "No."
Editors.
No, and I said no, and I pulled the book and gave her the money back. And then when I was figuring out the contract and the money and all that, I put the book online, figuring 4 people would get it. 160,000 people downloaded it. 160,000. I mean, that's insane. So when it came out, I had calls from HR directors saying, "Will you please come in and give us a talk or a day's training on how to hear each other?"
Yeah.
And then call me back and say, "Nobody wants a course. Everyone says, I already know how to listen." So the problem is our brains tell us that X was said.
Yeah.
When that's not true. And we don't even question it. We just assume what we hear is accurate, and it's most likely not.
Right.
That was the fun book.
And the process of writing, because it's something I haven't done, although I do have a lot of things I want to write about. Is it like, some people say it's like giving birth? So how do you manage that process? I mean, you've already had many books on your shelf.
First of all, I've written over 1,000 original articles on at Sharon-Drew.com. My 8 inventions are on the top, and if you scroll down, there's a blog, and then there's subcategories with questions and change and sales and buying facilitation, and at the bottom where there's 1,000 articles. I wake up with an idea, and I write anything. I don't care what it is. It doesn't matter what I write. Then I take a look at what I have, and then I began sculpting it. And one of the things that I find a very highly valued criteria for me is that people understand what I'm reading. And given that my ideas are sometimes a little bit outside of mainstream, is sometimes sometimes a challenge, and sometimes I even get it right. Not all the time, God knows, but sometimes.
Yeah.
And so first thing I do every morning as I read out loud what I wrote yesterday so that I can hear it, and I act as if I'm a reader. And then I know what's missing. I know what's too much. I know where it belongs. And I begin moving things around. And then I begin thinking like a reader. I try so hard to think like a reader so that it's like, that's too much and I wouldn't care. And then the other part of me goes, well, they need to know that. And then I say, no, it's too much for them. But I can introduce this and make a link to an article so they can find it if they want to.
Yeah.
So it's a continual process of me as the writer and me as the reader going back and forth and back and forth. And I choose words that readers will have an easier time with. So for example, my advisor partner for my facilitation AI, he wanted to say that we're creating self-generating prompts that find specific neural circuits. And I went, no, you can't say that, because people will go, what does that mean? They just say criteria-based decision-making. We don't have to say neural circuits. So I'm always aware of the other side. And I find it joyous fun. And by the way, one of the things I do when I invent is when I come up with like this gap between what's said and what's heard, I don't do research on whether or not anything like that exists until after I'm done inventing.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to be biased, you know? And I've never had to change it to keep up with science. But I have had many people say to me, oh my God, that's what's missing here. Can we use your ideas? I think we need more original thinkers around. I don't know how to get them though.
You know, one thing that strikes me about what you said, especially when you mentioned science, I think science has had a bad rap in many places. And it's because, and this is my opinion, of the establishments that support science. So educational institutions, universities, like I'll be specific. I think formal academic research is at least 30% a political exercise, like getting the right people to peer review your work or publish it in a particular journals has occasionally nothing to do with the essence of what you're writing. It's all about who you know, or how will this make certain people look in certain fields. And I'm worried if that's the fundamental kind of process by which knowledge is generated, how much knowledge has not been shared publicly or cascaded.
I want to tell you this story. I decided that if I had a PhD, that people would like my work and accept my work. Oh, that was wrong. So I was living in Austin, Texas at the time, and I went to the University of Texas, and there was a behavioral sciences group at the time. And I think the professor's name was Alex Huck or something like that. And I asked him if I could join his behavioral sciences lab. And I had sent him one of my books so that he would see what I wanted to prove. I wanted to prove my own theories that I've trained 100,000 people on my stuff, and they all had a pilot. So I know that it works, but it wasn't scientific. So I decided to get my PhD and create models for this. So I went to Alex and I walked in and he said, great stuff. I love it. And I said, oh, I'm so glad. Will you take me into your lab? And he said, well, yes, but you won't want to come. I said, why do you want to get a PhD? I said, well, I want people to believe me. And I want to have some credibility. He said, well, you can't get a PhD based on your work. I said, why not? He said, because you have nothing to cite.
No references.
Write books on it so that in 20 years people can cite your work for their PhDs and they can prove your models. I said, wait. You're telling me that all science is historic, and if there's a new idea, it can't be scientific. because science is based on history. And he said, correct.
Yeah, that's
So
really depressing. I mean, I was talking in a university yesterday online and giving them a talk about a career in data science, which is the hot thing nowadays. And I tell them that, data science is a contentious field because it borrows from many other sciences, but it so far defies its own definition as a science. And for the most part, many of the sciences it borrows from work exactly the way you mentioned, where you have people who, by definition, have outdated knowledge, basically older people, and they're going to be evaluating your new knowledge to see if it's worthy of inclusion in their body of work. And again, that just creeps me the hell out. Like, okay, how does that work? It's one thing to have evidence. In science is all about evidence, right? But this is opinions. These are opinions. These are politics. This is about establishment, and then don't get me started about the geopolitical aspect of research. Just by virtue of where you sit in the globe determines the likelihood that you get published, which is
I,
outrageous.
I was at a think tank and there were two Harvard neuroscientists, older guys. And I went over to them and I said, I was starting a conversation and I said, I've invented a new form of question that
Hmm.
actually teaches the brain how to find the correct neural circuits where its own answers are stored so people can discover their own criteria for decision making, which is the basis, obviously, of my new facilitation AI.
Yeah.
And the first one said, what do you need that for? Just tell people what to do.
Hmm. Yeah.
The second guy said, well, that's not possible. I went, no, we're not at Walmart. We're not at a gas station. We're at a think tank. So maybe I might have something, right? So he said, well, that's not possible. I went, I know. And he said, you're a liar. He
Wow.
called me a liar.
Wow.
I said it to the Stanford young guy, young neuroscientist. And he
Hmm.
said, oh, you can do that? Teach me. So we have the Harvard old guys who all believe that resistance is a thing to be worked on, versus if you do the whole process differently from the beginning, you don't get resistance.
Yeah.
Like there's trainers push knowledge and then get upset or annoyed when the students aren't learning, but they're using their own words, their own content, their own goal, their own sequencing, and then they don't understand why the people don't get it. And then they blame the students for not being motivated. Well, it's the fault of the training. The sales model is pushing data and assumes need. And then when the person doesn't buy, they blame it on the buyer, as opposed to the sales model, which was built to place solutions, not to facilitate the change that comes before it. It's
Yeah.
the same with all the models. People at the influencer stage push and push and push and push, assuming they're right and the other person's wrong. Talk about ethics. But imagine if you really believe that everyone has their own answers, that everyone's brain is unique, that their own answers are belief-based in the limbic system. It's belief-based, and in order to have a decision, in order to make a change, the people or the group or the person has to get to that circuit where the beliefs are stored and either change that, add to it. But that's the nut of where the decisions and the change and the learning and the buying, it all comes from, not from the data. So I have a big bugaboo about information, and data is the last thing people need once they make the decision. Because if I've decided to stay home with my parents and girlfriend to go to college, I don't need data about the college that's 500 miles away.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? So we're so busy pushing data, assuming that if we give the right data at the right time, that people will know what to do with it. That's not true.
Hmm.
Doctors push their diets and push their exercise regimen, and they call the patients being there. They don't want to change. No, you're pushing your stuff on them. So I don't happen to think data or content or information is useful until someone's already figured out how or why or if or when to make the decision to change. Then they need the data. So information is a second stage tool, not a primary tool, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fair point, and especially since, I mean, we kind of woke up one day and suddenly information is everywhere. Once upon a time, it used to flow very slowly, and there's a lot of gatekeeping. I mean, there is still some gatekeeping on certain sectors, certain parts of society, but for the most part, information is just being blasted at you right and left. And as I said, my concern there is we're not culturally ready for that. We don't have the right rules and laws in place.
Dominic,
Yeah.
our brains don't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
And the brain will do, if it goes against a belief we already have, the brain just discards it. Even if it's important, the brain will just discard it altogether. So when we dump information, the only people that will use it are those people that were either already looking for it,
Yeah.
or those people whose beliefs match the new data and are willing to. I had to invent a new way to train.
Hmm.
When it came time for me to start training buying facilitation, I said, wait, I don't believe that pushing information will teach anybody. So
Hmm.
I invented a new way to train that helps learners first. The whole first day, I get them to understand where they need new data, where they need to add something, where they have an incongruence. Change only happens when there's an incongruence.
Yeah.
Okay, when the brain recognizes that there's something not working, something missing. Giving information doesn't teach people that because it gets discarded. So the whole first day of a training program, I teach people how to recognize their incongruences. And they're walking around at the end of the day going, what a terrible father I am. All I do is say, oh my God, I don't hear anybody. All I do is listen for, oh my God. And they walk around the whole, and then they come in the next morning and they go, teach me, teach me. But
Hmm.
I don't teach them until the second day. I mean, I've already taught them everything the first day and a half. But, and my training programs have no tables, no computers, no pens, no paper, no notes. All they have is a chair, because I'm working with their brain first. I'm not working with their mind. Whereas normal training, you're trying to shove information in, and the only people that will accept it are those people that are ready for it and have a place for it. So what I do is I make sure everyone has a place for it by the middle of day 2, and then everybody learns. And they learn, they keep them, they retain the knowledge for 30. I just got a call from someone who said, I took your course 30 years ago and I still know what you taught me then. How did you do that when I've had a million training programs since then? I don't remember anything.
Yeah.
So we have to change the rules around when to employ information. Okay, just my unique bias.
No, I'm really fascinated by kind of your fresh perspectives. I'm wondering if, as you kind of develop this methodology, where do you see? I mean, it's been a year, as I keep saying, it's the 1 year anniversary of ChatGPT. I don't think we're really quite there yet in terms of adoption. And more importantly, obviously with the drama going on in California, it could very well be the last we see of ChatGPT, and there'll be other chatbots coming in, and they'll have their own stories and biases. So I'm wondering, where do you think, as an author and kind of the proponent of this new approach or modified approach to AI and data and all this information, where do you see it going in the next few years? Like what do you
I'm
see
not
in
just
2024?
I'm not just a proponent, honey. I'm the inventor.
Yeah.
Just um I I have a belief, and I'm the inventor. What do you want me to say? It's gonna fail. So
Yeah.
I have a belief that it'll be ubiquitous, that you can get online and ask it, how do I start up a company? Or should I break up with my girlfriend?
Yeah.
That you use facilitation AI for this, and generative or causal AI or some kind of a chat or Bing AI for that. I think it'll just be one of many. And I think after I invent this, somebody else will come along and invent something else. But I just think it's the next step that we're going to have. And I think it'll take a couple of years before it becomes ubiquitous, but I think it'll become ubiquitous in my lifetime, I think.
Yeah.
What do you think? Don't you think it's a good idea? I think it's a good idea.
No, absolutely. I'm all for it. And I actually liken this uh not just to the time when we were transitioning into the internet era, like the late 90s, early 2000s. It's pretty much akin to any major movement where one moment you had no one using it, and the next moment everyone's using it, and then the next moment we have to figure out if we're using it the right way. The same thing went for books. The same thing went for television. It's all about the consumption of that information. And to your point, now information is no longer something that you push on people. It takes on a dynamic. We kind of live in that information. One thing that I keep saying is, I kind of adapted that. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Sam Harris. He had this quote about the storm, and I kind of uh, kind of reworded that for my purpose. I said we don't control data, nor are we lost in it. We are the data, and it's taking people time to kind of realize that. I know that intuitively, but in my gut, that data and people, sh- you know, from a practical standpoint, are synonymous. But we also don't treat data properly, just like we don't treat people properly. And I think that's, for me, the essence of what I'm appreciating about the work that you're doing.
And I think data, as I said, has a place.
Yeah.
And I don't think we can start with data. For example, if you look something up, I'm going to just say the word 5, but it could be 5 million. Let's say there are 5 references.
Yeah.
I mean, it's usually a lot more than that, but let's say, how do you choose which one to listen to if they're different? Okay. The way we choose now is because we already have neural circuits set up that make one of them seem right. And the other ones go against our beliefs and we assume they're wrong. Well, but that's not true. I mean, it's true for that person at that moment, but it's not true, right? So every choice of data we make is unique and biased. So how do we know which data is accurate? We don't. So that's why I tell researchers that you're only getting a subset of accurate data. They're not getting the full set. Now, if they're using my facilitation model, they'll get closer to accurate. They'll get closer to their criteria. But how do they know if something else is right and they're rejecting it? I mean, how many people have rejected my buying facilitation model? And I say, but you're closing 5% from first call. If you even get a first call, my clients close 40% from first call. Well, how can you say that what I'm doing is crazy? Because it's systemic. It's built into the system. That's the way it's always been. And people keep doing it that way. So information that it's not working or it doesn't even help because that's the way it's done. There's perceived wisdom. So information doesn't stand on its own. You do have bias to think about. You do have perceived wisdom to think about. And how do you know what's true?
Yeah. Actually, I also have a role in the journalistic sector. And that's another area that is, for me, an open question. Right now, there are no AI models that can reliably detect the output of other AI models. My favorite example is you could copy paste the US Constitution on one of these AI detectors and it would say 99% AI generated, only because it's probably one of the most quoted pieces of text everywhere, and that just flags it as potentially AI generated. And that's how naive sometimes these detectors are.
What was so interesting for me when I read that mess that ChatGPT made of what is buying facilitation, I'm the only one that uses that term, or if people use it, they have to use it according to the legal definition. And I am on top of everything written about it. So I know it's all written about as a change facilitation model to facilitate people through their risk management. So I know what it means. I've written, I'm going to say 300 articles on it. When it came to me in that mess, how did it figure out to use the sales model as the main thought?
As the reference, right? Yeah.
It wasn't from me. So who created rules where they could take something with a legal definition and make shmush out of it? Yeah. So how can you believe anything there? How can you believe anything?
Yeah. And I think that's also part of the when we look at the ethical use of these models, because of the way it responds, because of the way it processes requests, there's an implied authority on AI, which is not doesn't necessarily follow. Like just because a model
No.
said this, doesn't mean it's true.
Well, there is whenever we ask a question, even if we go on Google and we get answers, there's an applied authority and we assume it's true. We assume that doctors are right. There's an applied, but
Yeah.
that's our belief, so we give it to them. When I had an emergency a few years ago, and every time they came to give me something, I said, "What's that? I'm not taking that." And I was a problem client, a problem patient, because I said, "What are you giving me that?" No. And finally the doctor came in and said, "You don't have to take any of this stuff. I just want you to know that I was giving it to you for a reason." I said, "Great, would you like to sit down and discuss it with me? And I'll make you consider, but just to be given something because you think I should have it doesn't mean I think I should have it." Nobody questions authority. They just assume people know. And I don't know why we give up our authority, especially women. I'm sorry, but especially women do that. And I think women are getting more powerful and stronger these days. I'm thinking.
Yeah, I mean, that talks about the politics of information, politics of data as well, which is a completely separate episode in itself. We can tackle that. Anyway, I'm just being conscious of time. We're nearly at the hour. Is there well, number one is, could you share some advice for, basically anyone trying to make sense of this data-driven, AI-driven world? And then later, let's go for, maybe let people know how to get in touch with you, how to access your work.
In terms, what I have found the chat models are good for is when there's something I really, really, really don't know how to do. So how do I create an LLM was one of my first questions, because I'm new at this and I'm not a tech person and I'm not an AI person. As a matter of fact, I'm reading this book.
That's a nice one.
Have you read this?
I've seen it online. Yeah.
I'm trying to learn. I'm learning. So I'm asking it simple questions that have rather obvious answers, and I'm staying away from the other stuff. But one of the things I've noticed is, and it's relatively obvious, it's the way you pose the question, and the more concise you make the question, the better the answer. But I've also been studying different kinds of chats, and there's 30 of them or 40 of them, and there are some that are more accurate, that are known to be more accurate. There are some that will write code for you. There are some that will are known to write really good articles. So I would just look around, and I would have a censor that doesn't necessarily trust what I'm reading. That's what I would do. But it's exciting, and I think there's going to be a lot of change. The question, of course, is how to maintain the ethics. I think prompt engineers need a lot of training because they have so much bias in their questions. How can prompt engineers be trained to be less biased? I would love to develop a program for prompt engineers to formulate the proper questions. Just saying. I think we're at the Wild West cowboy days.
Yep.
I think we know what the hell we're doing, and we're playing with some powerful stuff there that I think will be reined in at some point. I do have a little fear that there's going to be some rules, governmental rules that are put on things too early before we know it's all possible. And I think we're just in a black hole right now.
Yeah. And then there's still a lot of uncertainty about how the technology will evolve. That's another problem. Okay. How do people get in touch with you, Sharon-Drew, and or where do they go to learn more about your work?
If you go to Sharon-Drew.com, my 10 inventions, my learning, my facilitated questions, my sales, my change, there's all on the top. And then if you scroll down to the blog area, there's 1,000 articles, and they're all put in nice pictures, and it's all available, so you can choose some of the articles. And I've written them all, and I have I'm an original thinker, so the ideas are pretty cool, I've been told. And then my new book has all of my models and the how. It teaches you how to break down your own brain and how you can create new neural circuits in your own brain to learn this stuff. And the book is called How, and that's on mind-brain-connection.com. So I've got several sites and bunches of books, and I still train buying facilitation to salespeople, and I still do keynotes, and I'm still working. So if there's anything you need or have questions about, call me. My email address is my name, Sharon-Drew at Sharon-Drew-Morgen.com, MORGEN.com.
Okay. And with that, thank you, Sharon-Drew, for joining the conversation. Hope to have you on another episode where we can hear more about your work. We barely scratched the surface.
Thank you, Dominic. Blessing.